After 20 years in power, Recep Tayyip Erdogan has managed to extend his reign. This election in Turkey was touted to be a litmus test for his political career, and he won a historic runoff. Now, it was too early to call the race, even after 95% of the ballots were opened. The difference was low and it even shrunk in places. But with 97% of the votes counted, Erdogan came out on the streets of Istanbul and addressed his supporters. But this election also unmasked how polarized the Turkish society has become. Let's take a look at the numbers. 52.1% of the votes were in Erdogan's favor, which means 47.9% of the people did not want him in power anymore. Now, in the May 14th polls, when there were 4 candidates in the race, this number stood at 44.9% for Erdogan. Now, let's zoom out for a global picture. Just like the polls in Turkey, even the world looks similarly polarized. Western capitals were awfully silent throughout the Turkish presidential campaign, even in times when Erdogan's party leaders accused the US of manipulating the elections in Turkey. But now that the united opposition camp has failed to unseat Erdogan in Turkey, Western leaders have sent their congratulatory messages. Some are saying they are looking forward to working with him. Others are talking about deepening ties. Now, these leaders are wary. But why? The West is caught between fear and hope. It fears that NATO, which Turkey is part of, will drift away from its liberal image, and it hopes that Erdogan will look beyond his personal image. Now, let's explain this in a little more detail. The first challenge will be to keep Erdogan from getting cozy with Russia's Vladimir Putin, and that is essentially the main task at hand. And that is where the anti-West rhetoric essentially starts. In fact, in Turkey, it might not be a rhetoric anymore. Erdogan's interior minister said that anyone who displayed pro-Western tendencies is a traitor. And this accurately reflects the mindset in Turkey. Many experts believe that opposition contender Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu lost because of the perception that he is pro-West. Now, that was the domestic front. On a more global stage, Erdogan's first test will come at the NATO summit in Vilnius, where he will be asked to lift Turkey's veto on the NATO membership of Sweden. He has already lifted his block on Finland's membership, but has left Sweden in limbo and in a potentially dangerous grey zone. You see, Sweden has an even larger Kurdish population than Finland, and hence it is struggling to rationalize some of Erdogan's demands. But NATO has its own share of shortcomings now. US is facing its own share of domestic issues, which is why, despite Joe Biden calling Erdogan an autocrat, he is willing to negotiate. NATO members like Germany and Hungary are facing recession as we speak. And if anyone, it was Turkey which managed to convince Russia on the grain deal. So it looks like Erdogan's gain might just become NATO's loss. All right, for more on this, we are being joined by Uluç Özülker. He is a former Turkish diplomat and has served as ambassador to Libya and France. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Thank you.
Uluç, we've already seen how long it took Finland to be admitted to NATO. How much of a problem can Erdogan's ties with Putin create for the West?
Well, I think that there's a mistake all around when people start discussing the veto of Turkey against Sweden and what NATO represents. First of all, I need to emphasize one point which is extremely critical and important for Turkey. We are sitting at a region, as the whole country, which is extremely critical to survive, and with a lot of non-democratic approaches from everywhere. And there is a war going on in our near to us at the frontiers. So as such, there are 2 main points that Turkey need to take into consideration inevitably. The first of all is that on our south, Russia is actually sitting in in Syria as a partner, but at the same time, Russia, who was looking to come to Mediterranean 400, 200 years long, is now a neighbor to Turkey from the south. And on the other hand, there is a war going on in different regions of around Turkey, and to start with between Russia and Ukraine. And again, in Caucasus, between the conflictual situation between Azerbaijan and Armenia is again and yet another problem. So as such, Turkey is sitting at a region where it needs to take care of its situation by balancing the relations with many of its neighboring countries as much as with NATO.
Right.
If
Mr.
Turkey is...
Right,
Yes,
Mr.
please.
Ozulkar, now the fact that Erdogan convinced Russia on the grain deal, is Turkey perhaps the last bridge between Russia and the West? And how do you feel Turkey can use this to its advantage?
Well, we already use it not only to our advantage, but to the advantage of the whole world in reality. For example, don't forget that the wheat which is exported from Ukraine is exported thanks to the Turkish behavior and thanks to the efforts of the Turkish government to reconcile the two sides in order to let this wheat go freely to the world. For example, 20 million tons of wheat has gone this way. And on the other side, don't forget that Turkey, together maybe with China, I mean, I may compare it a little bit, but fully, Turkey is the only country who can speak really directly to Mr. Putin as much as to the Russian officials altogether. So which means that, for example, whenever there is a difficult point to discuss, Mr. Putin is calling the Turkish president in order to ask him to help him to settle the best way the problem that he is facing with the neighbors. And the American side, for example, is making the war with Russia in reality. It's not an Ukrainian-Russian war, but more an American-supported Russian war. I mean, there too, Turkey plays an extremely important role between the two sides. So as such, everybody needs Turkey in this context. And we must not forget one thing which is quite important as well. If NATO loses the Turkish support in it, then it's an extremely important question that NATO is going to be faced off. And secondly, if Russia loses Turkey, then most probably it will be weakened because there will be no more interference or, let's say, help for the Russians to speak with the outside world.
Right, so
neither.
Essentially, Turkey is playing a pivotal role between the West and Russia for both sides. But Turkey will consider its own interests with both the sides. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. That was Uluç Ozulkar joining us from Istanbul.
Thank you to you.